Assalamu Alaikum everyone, welcome back to another video. I hope you're having a wonderful day. So recently we've done two videos where we looked at kind of set and forget portfolio. So if you're starting your own portfolio right now, or you've already got one and you want to make sure it's basically up to the standards that you want, I'm going to give you some advice and some ideas that you can look into, inshallah. And the advice is just what I basically would have done personally. It's not financial advice, so just bear in mind. So the three videos, this is the last one. The first one was about the individual stocks. So I've given you three different categories within that. There's five different stocks in each category. If you haven't watched that video, go and watch that first one, and where we talked about, of course, the importance of investing in the stock market and so on. So watch that video before you watch the next two. The second video was about 8 different Sharia compliant ETFs. I've given you the information about each individual stock. We talked about expense ratio, we talked about performance a year to date and so on. And today's video is the final 5. So in total there should be 13 different Sharia compliant ETFs. So today's video we're going to focus on the last 5. If you have not already liked this video, please do it, because it takes a lot of time to put these videos together, a lot of energy to record it, edit it, and then release it to the public for free. And that is honestly takes a lot of the time. So I would really genuinely appreciate if you can actually like the video, subscribe to the channel, let me know if you have any questions. Of course, if you want to help the channel as well, join us on the Discord, join us on the Patreon account. That will be really helpful, where you get a benefit, as well as of course joining the Discord, where you've got loads of brothers are sharing absolutely amazing basically conversations, resources, links, whatever you can think of. Everybody's sharing what they can, inshallah. Right, so the first ETF that we're looking at today comes from HSBC. This is the emerging markets ETF. It has expense ratio of 0.35. Year to date is down almost 2%, and these are the top 10 companies which make up about 40% of this ETF. So you got big boys here, you got Taiwan here, you got Samsung, for example. You've got what else have you got? Al Rajhi Bank, you got Petrolia, which is a Brazilian petroleum company. You got the Chinese companies, you got Samsung again. The Samsungs is like the only difference is one is voting, so you're allowed to vote. It's like class A, class B of Apples, Apples and Alphabet and so on. So as you can see, this makes up about 40%. So if we just have a quick look at that, okay. As you can see here, you can see about almost the 15% comes from Samsung here, 10% Taiwan Semis, and then so on. Okay, so again, in top heavy, the first two, I think we've seen with a lot of the ETFs that we've talked about in the last couple of days, is basically the last couple of videos, it's basically has the top 2 companies have almost a 20+% of the entire ETFs, which is quite a lot, because if one of these companies goes down, then they of course hopefully when they rebalance again they will change that. But there you have it. That's the first ETFs that we wanted to look at today. The next company we look at, and the second ETF that we're looking at today, is again comes from HSBC, and this is the World Islamic ETF. And as you can see here, it has a 0.3 expense ratio, 24.44% up since the beginning of the year, which is absolutely huge. And the reason is, if you look at the companies in there, this reminds me of the iShares one, because they're more or less similar sort of companies. But it has Microsoft, it has Tesla, it has Merck, for example, Adobe, J&J, Shell, and so on. Now, it might not be in this order, but as you can see, majority of the companies in there are also here. So I think it's more or less the same, but they are in different kind of order, I think. Are they in different orders? Yeah, more or less. Yeah, actually in the same order. Right, so you got Microsoft 17, 18%, 3%, 3.6% of Tesla, Adobe 2.87%, and then so on. So I like the fact that the rest of them are about 2%. I don't like the fact that Microsoft is 17%, but I'm assuming, like I said in the last video, that is probably maybe when they rebalance it, that's what it is. Or it could be just the index, the fact that index is actually weighted more, and Microsoft is weighted more on that index. But again, performance wise, a year to date, that's absolutely amazing. 24%, 25%. I think the S&P 500 right now is about between 20, I think it's 22, 23%. But you can see this is done really well. Okay, Next one is Europe. So again, HSBC, the same more or less family of ETFs, 0.3, 20%. Let's call it 21%. Again, it has more or less some of the best European companies that we know. You got your Shells, you got SAP, Novartis, for example, L'Oreal, Schneider Electric, Total Energies, you got AB, you got Sonerv. You actually this is the only two companies that actually have not come across, but the rest of them I've actually come across before. Again, solid companies, 41%, almost to 40 to 41%, that basically make up the top 10, make up 41%, which is quite huge. But we've seen similar sort of things so far, whereas the last video we looked at some of the companies, some of the ETFs were like almost 50%, if not over 50. So again, looking at the holdings, it might be slightly different order, but there we go. It's 5%, 5%, 5%. I like this. This is better. So the Europe is actually nicely weighted. Okay, it's almost the same companies, but it's basically weighted slightly different, which is quite nice. I like that. I like that. 5%, 5%, 4%, 3%, 3%, 2%. I like this. Okay, and the factor is 0.3, similar to what we've seen so far, similar to what you would get with iShares and so on. So yeah, not bad at all. The next one is Japan. Japan is 0.3 as well. The performance is not great, 2.55. But again, a lot of people are saying Japan is going to do well in the next couple of years. But again, who knows? Okay, because Warren Buffett is buying it, it doesn't mean basically it's going to go to the moon. But as you can see, some of the big companies that we know from Japan, but some of them I've never even heard of. Bridgestone, that's interesting. But yeah, so some of the companies that we used to, almost 50% in terms of the top 10. So the weightings for the top 10 is almost 50%, which is quite interesting. So if you look at the weightings, for example, 6%, 5%, 5%, 5%, and then so on. So again, the weighting is actually quite nicely distributed. It's not just top heavy. It's not like the top two make up the whole thing, which is quite nice. Right, the next one, the final one for this, is the US version of this. And as you can see, 0.3 total return, basically year-to-date return of 22%, almost 21, 22%. Again, the reason is because you've got the big boys here. This is more or less the S&P 500. This is similar to Halal, for example, SPUS, and so on. They're very similar sort of companies here. You've got your Microsoft, you've got your Tesla, Adobe, Salesforce, J&J, Intuit, Cisco, Advanced Micro Devices, Intel, Danaher. All of these companies are great. It makes up almost over 58% is basically the top 10 companies, which is top heavy if you think about it. Okay, but I'm assuming Microsoft will probably be the 20% or something. There you have it, over 21% is Microsoft. Then you got Tesla 7%, then 5% for Adobe, 3% for Salesforce, 3% for J&J, almost 3% for Intuit, Cisco about 3%, and then so on. So not bad. The rest of them are okay, but it's just the top two. Top two make up over 30%, closer to 30% of the entire thing, which is quite huge if you think about. So, but a lot of these ETFs are doing this. But I like the fact that the expense ratios are not bad. I'm hoping that they will come back. When I say bad for halal, basically Sharia compliant ones. Because if you compare it with VOO, for example, which is the Vanguard S&P 500, is 0.02, I think. 0.02. This is 0.3. So it's still expensive, but not as expensive as, of course, it used to be. So it's getting better. So I'm hopeful, inshallah, the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see massive change in terms of these things. Now, that's the 5 ETFs that I wanted to share with you guys today. All of them are basically similar to the ones that we've seen. They track the underlying indexes that they track basically are more or less the same. There are some companies here that are not Sharia compliant, but remember, this is an ETF, so they treat it as a one ETF, basically stock, and then they do all the analysis on that. As long as there are no companies that sell pork and so on, and non-pornographies, and your usual weapons and whatever, all of that taken out. Whatever is left, they of course make sure that is the basically entire business side of it is less than 5%, the 33% is met, and then so on. So but there you have it. So for me, what would I do? Out of all of these 5 basically ETFs, the one I would be really interested in is the European one, because I don't own that many European ETFs. So out of the 13 companies ETFs that we looked at, I'm going to look at the European ones and see if I can actually do some analysis on some of these companies and think about how they might do in the next few years. Japan seems interesting, and emerging markets is just full of loads of different countries, so I don't think I will get into that. World, I've already have one. US and the world, there's not much of a difference, as you even see these two here. Okay, they have more or less same companies, if not exact same companies. So these two is always the same, because even for the iShare ones, it's exactly more or less the same. So the European ones is interesting. The Japan one is interesting. Japan, I'm not sure. I have to learn more about that market. Recently, everyone is talking about it, so it'll be interesting to learn more about it. European is easier. There's a lot more information out there for these European stocks, so I might do a bit more analysis on this, and then maybe just buy one of these ETFs and hold it for the long term. Again, none of these things are not going to the moon straight away. If you are a long-term investor, you're looking for steady Eddie kind of situation where you just buy and holding good ETFs for the long term, then you could potentially make some money. Imagine, right? If I basically put all my money into this one ETF right now, since I started buying it, I would be up about 15%. And that's about 2 years. I think I've had this ETF, maybe two and a bit, I think 2 years. So last 2 years, I would be up 15%. I would love that. That's absolutely amazing. So if I had put everything, almost £90,000 into this one ETF, okay, which you shouldn't do anyway, but I'm just giving it as an example, I would be up right now about 15% for the last 2 years. Of course, the S&P 500 is up about 21%, and this ETF has actually underperformed the other ETFs. So if I had, for example, Halal or what the other ETFs that have done like 21%, 23% or whatever they've done this year, then of course I would have actually outperformed the market or similarly performed as the market. I'm not here to beat the market. I'm just making sure that I can get at least 7 to 10% of my overall money every single year. So there you have it. That's the videos that I wanted to share. 3 different videos, 1 for stocks, 2 for ETFs, 13 different ETFs, 15 different stocks. I hope you appreciate this, what we're trying to do here. And if you do, please join us on the Patreon account, join us on the Discord. Of course, like the videos, subscribe to the channel. Let me know if you have any questions. Have a wonderful day. Assalamu Alaikum.